The wedding at Cana, which is taken from the Gospel of St. John, chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and didn't know where it came from, although the servants who'd drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him.
Thank you, Kathy. So this is, I'm sure, a much loved story that we're all really familiar with. And I love this story too. I love that Jesus performs his first miracle at a wedding celebration. That's got to be affirmation of the importance of hospitality in our ministry. And I love the generosity of Jesus, that he produces way more wine than a guest could possibly drink. And I love all the hidden symbolism in this passage. But when I sit down in lockdown and read this passage, the story perhaps sits a little bit uncomfortably. We can't have anything like a normal wedding celebration at the moment. We can't even have one person round for supper. We can't be with our friends, sharing laughs, jokes, food. We can't even support each other during the tough times, during the losses, the sadnesses, the difficult times. And then, of course, there's the extravagance of this story. If you calculate it up, Jesus made available up to 600 to 900 bottles of fine wine. When the world around us is in need at the moment, perhaps that extravagance can feel a little bit uncomfortable. My friend in Rwanda tells me that they have no support from the government during this pandemic. So when they are told to stay at home and transport isn't working, they can't go to work, they just don't earn any money at all. And then he tells me that the food prices have rocketed and life is very, very scary for them. They worry about starvation on top of the fear of the disease. And if we look closer to home, of course, there are so many redundancies, businesses going under, parents struggling to feed their children. That's what's going on for us at the moment. So perhaps this story could sound a little bit irrelevant or frivolous to us. Well, yes, maybe on the surface, but you really don't have to dig deep with this passage to find some absolute gems which are relevant for all people at all times. Today, I'd like to focus on the servants in this passage and what we can learn from the servants. And I think the involvement of the servants in Jesus's first miracle is absolutely beautiful and something which we must not overlook. Thank you, Phil. This next slide. If we remember just a few weeks ago back at Christmas, it was the humble shepherds which were the first people to be told about the birth of Jesus and to visit the baby Jesus. And in this story, it's the lowly servants who are around to witness Jesus's first miracle, his first transformation. What an honor it would have been for them. And the miracle itself carries really huge significance. Thank you, Phil. because this miracle reveals to us exactly who Jesus is. Jesus had just called his disciples. They don't know each other very well. And so this is a statement right at the start of Jesus's ministry about who he is. Of course, within our laws of physics, we couldn't turn water to wine on our own. So the very fact that Jesus is able to do something supernatural, something miraculous, is evidence of his identity, and it can only point us to God. So right at the start, Jesus is revealing his glory. And who are the witnesses? Well, his disciples. He wants to show them exactly who he is, and also these servants. But not only do the servants witness this miracle, but Jesus actually works through the servants and with the servants to perform the miracle. Thanks, Phil. So Mary is the first one to engage with the servants, and she tells them to listen to Jesus. And then Jesus says to the servants, fill the jars with water. And they filled them up to the brim. And Jesus said to them, now draw some out and take it to the chief steward. So they took it. So notice that the miracle is happening through the hands of the servants. It might have been Jesus's power that actually changed the water to wine, but it was the servants who filled the stone jars with water. And it was the servants who poured the water into the vessel to take to the chief steward. Jesus worked through the servants, and he works through us today. Notice how the servants listened to Jesus. They trusted him completely, and they did exactly what Jesus asked them. No ifs or buts. They just did it. Not only was the water transformed into wine, but I should think that the lives of those servants were also transformed in that moment. And I feel this is such a beautiful illustration of Jesus's love and compassion for the marginalized and the oppressed. Thanks, Phil. So this story, it really shows us that we don't need to be special for Jesus to work through us. He works through all of us if we ask him and allow him to. He is the master of turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. But I wonder if some of us might still be doubting that miraculous transformations and things, can they still really happen today? Well, I was reminded of a story, a news story I read before Christmas, and perhaps some of us here have also read this. So Phil, if we can have the next slide. This was a story about Pastor Mick, and the BBC News ran quite a long story on him because he was taking food and clothing to the poor in Burnley, the poor in Hungary, that's in Lancashire. And if you missed this before Christmas, it's well worth a read. Mick's life was completely transformed in a very, very dramatic way. He wasn't always a kind and gentle vicar or pastor. He used to be a very dangerous and violent drug user and dealer for many years until a single moment changed everything. He was sat in a stolen car waiting for his victim to walk out of the gym. And when his victim walked out of the gym, he was walking hand in hand with his two daughters, two beautiful blonde girls who were probably about the age of 5. Mick got out of his car, but at that moment, what he describes as a bright and blinding light came from one of the girls' hands. And he says, it was like looking into the sun, and I was paralyzed by it. Lasted for about 15 seconds. He collapsed, and then he struggled back to his car. And at this point, he pleaded with God for help. In that moment, Mick was completely overwhelmed by emotions, by pain from his very traumatic childhood. And also with the memories flooding back from all the years, I think even decades, of evil which he had committed. He attempted to take his own life, but the trigger on his gun wouldn't work. And this episode led to Mick being sectioned. And then once in hospital, Mick received the help that he needed and the support from a pastor. And through this, Mick's life was completely transformed. He went to study a degree in theology, and then, as you can see, he's become ordained. And he now works on the streets, sharing God's love and help and compassion with the homeless, with drug users, and with the hungry. Thank you, Phil. So sometimes God transforms our lives suddenly and very dramatically, like with Mick. But I think probably more often, transformation happens in our lives in a much more gentle and a much more gradual way, which probably comes across as a relief. But I wonder if the idea of being transformed by God, is it exciting or is it actually a bit scary and daunting for us? Do we believe that transformations can really happen today? I wonder how many of us have had experiences of transformation in our lives already. But if we're curious and up for an adventure, we've got to start by learning from these humble servants in this story. Thanks, Phil. So the servants listened to Jesus, and we too need to prioritize listening to Jesus. We need to make enough time for him in our lives. Time when we can just sit perhaps with him in silence, to be still and listen for his voice. And the better we get to know Jesus, the easier it then becomes to recognize his voice. The servants put their trust in Jesus. They knew that they just poured water into those vessels. And then Jesus was asking them to take this water to the chief steward when he was expecting to taste wine. That took some trust and faith in Jesus. And the servants were completely obedient to Jesus. They did exactly what he asked. There were no questions asked. They just got on and did what Jesus asked them. So if we want to go on an adventure of transformation with Jesus, we need to learn from these servants. We need to learn to listen, to trust and have faith in Jesus, and to do what he asks us. So I'm just going to finish with the final verse from that wonderful hymn at the beginning, "Be still for the presence of the Lord." They're such beautiful words, and Phil is very kindly going to find us the last verse of "Be Still."
Be still, for the power of the Lord is moving in this place. He comes to cleanse and heal, to minister his grace. No work too hard for him. In faith receive from him. Be still, for the power of the Lord is moving